Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Preimesberger, editor of eWEEK. Thanks for joining us today for our latest edition of eWEEK eSpeaks, our regular series of conversations with IT thought leaders. Our interviewee today is Ofer Israeli, and that's his name, Ofer Israeli. He is the CEO of Illusive Networks, which is a security company based in both Israel and the United States. Ofer, welcome to eSpeaks.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure being here. And indeed, that really is my name.
I like it. And Illusive is a really interesting name too. Does that describe the way the company operates or what?
Yeah, it does. So we started out with the concept of how we create these illusions for attackers and how we feed misinformation into our security strategy, the world's security strategy.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and about the way Illusive goes about doing its job in security.
Sure. So my personal background, as my name suggests, I'm Israeli. So born and raised there with a few years in the States as well. I spent several years in the security industry at Check Point, working on the R&D division, working on numerous different products and such. And about 6-7 years ago, I was really interested in the space of targeted attacks, and there was a large rise in these, and obviously many nation states were being very successful at them for many years prior. But then the cyber criminals picked up on that and started doing a lot of their activities, and it saw a big gap in the market in the sense that there were all of these defensive strategies, but they weren't as effective as we had hoped them to be. And eventually we did see more and more attacks happen, and the circumstances and consequences of those attacks grew. And it was clear that there's a massive problem the world is facing then. And it was pretty clear that the trajectory is that the problem is just going to grow, and the gap between what we can do about it and where the problem is really is at is also going to grow. So we kind of looked at what do we do about it, and how do we approach this differently.
Okay, and so what you're telling me is that rather than just being a defensive security scheme, you are also an offensive, or is that what you're implying there, Ofer, or what? Because perimeters can be pierced from the outside and from the inside. And so I think what you're saying is that you're able to look at both sides of the perimeter and protect it. Is that fair enough, or is that too general?
Yeah, so I'll refine a bit. I would not define us as offensive because we don't take offensive action against the adversary. But what we do is we have a proactive strategy to defending the organization. Meaning that if you think about most security solutions, they're built reactively, right? The attacker needs to do something, they look for it, they identify it, and so on. And our approach is, what can we do actively inside the corporate environment, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, but within the confinements of what belongs, quote unquote, to that organization? What can we do actively to prevent the attacks from happening in the first place, to detecting them should they happen, and to gathering actionable insights on anything that does actually happen? So that's kind of a different paradigm, different mindset. Very much actually discussed a lot. It's very active now because MITRE have just put out their active defense framework, the MITRE Shield framework, which talks exactly about that. How do you take an active approach and kind of midway between defensive and offensive?
Okay. I realize that security companies have a lot of secret sauce that they're reluctant to talk about. So I get that. But can you walk us through just maybe a hypothetical or maybe a real example of how once an intruder gets past the perimeter and into a system, what does Illusive do from there?
Yeah, great. And that's exactly where we kick in, right? So our whole notion is you will be infiltrated somehow, right? Maybe an attacker finds a way in, maybe it's a malicious insider that's already in your environment. What we do is we make it really hard for that attacker to move across the environment. So this whole lateral movement phase between point A, where you landed, to point B, where the asset that you're looking for is. We make that really, really complicated across the spectrum of prevention, detection, response. And kind of in a nutshell, we build this 000 world. Our vision is this 000 world where in the environment there are 0 privileged accounts accessible to an attacker to be able to move in the first place. The SOC has 0 false positives off of the detections that we produce, and the incident responders have 0 wasted investigation. So they actually spend the time on the things that matter. And so that's what we thrive for. And we've built a product suite that can deliver things in the vicinity of that 000 world.
Okay. So a lot of my readers or viewers may understand the idea of the old idea of the honeypot inside of a system. And that goes back to the 90s, probably, I think. And, where an intruder was drawn to a particular place in a system and then caught and captured. How is what Illusive doing different from that concept, or is it similar?
Yeah. So I'll answer in 2 different aspects. Aspect number 1 is that we certainly have a strong deception product and capability, but it's only a part of what we do. So you think about things like attack surface management, which is more the preventative piece. That's beyond deception in general. So on the one hand, it's kind of a broader platform to cover the full life cycle. Mm-hmm. But specifically per deception, to your point, deception has been around for a while. There's been honeypots for 25 years or so. Honeypots, we try to look at things from a use case perspective. Honeypots are really good at, if I capture an attacker and I want to study him, I want to watch the fish in the fishbowl, I can do that, right? If an attacker lands in the honeypot, I can look at what he's doing, how he's doing, and figure out, what he's about. What they're not all that great for is detecting the activity in the first place, right? Because attackers do not just stumble into systems, especially nowadays. They're very surgical in their approach. It's very pinpointed. They follow the real paths that exist inside the organization. So a spray and pray approach of just setting up as many honeypots as possible won't likely divulge many high fidelity detections. On the flip side, the approach we took in deception is endpoint-based deception. So we lay our deception layer on any real endpoint and any real server, your real production assets, and that's where attackers are actually gathering information to propagate internally. So we basically feed them or walk them down a pathway that would surface that detection. And in our humble opinion, when you think about most organizations out there, their bigger problem is, how do I detect the threat in the first place? Sure, there are some organizations that want to capture an attacker, do a lot of extensive research. That's the high-end, very sophisticated and so on. And there's a place for that. But for the vast majority, let's get really good at detecting the attacker in the first place.
Okay, Ofer, we've got a couple minutes left. Tell me about a couple of 1 or 2 key trends you're seeing in your part of the business that Illusive is working on, or whatever.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, like us all, we're all seeing the impacts of COVID and then specifically working from home. The attack surface is exploding. It's changing. Organizations are scrambling to figure out, how do you handle this new world with this new attack surface? And at the same time, asking themselves the question, is this a short period and are we back in the office, or should we set ourselves up for longer term kind of strategy? I believe it is a longer term kind of strategy that needs to be set up, and they're scrambling to do that. The second, that's a big trend that we're seeing, and we're helping organizations kind of manage that new threat landscape and in this new profile of organizations. The second aspect is that we're seeing even faster realization of organizations that artificial intelligence, behavioral analysis, anomaly detection is not the solution to all problems. And so you think about today, in today's crazy erratic environment, suddenly baselining and looking for anomalies becomes really, really, really hard. In order to have something that tells you this is anomalous, it implies there's a normal.
Right.
can you tell me what a normal is? Because I certainly can't, and I don't think many others can. So organizations are trying to scramble to figure out, okay, well, if I'm getting a lot of false positives now from my anomaly systems, and that's likely not the right strategy for me for the foreseeable future, what do I need to do instead? So that's another area we help them with a deterministic detection.
Very good. Ofer Israeli, CEO of Illusive. Thank you very much for being on eSpeaks today.
Chris, it was a pleasure chatting. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and if anybody listening along here wants to go deeper, where would they go? Illusive.com, or is it a different domain?
Yeah, it's elusivenetworks.com, and you can follow us obviously on the social networks on LinkedIn and Twitter. We have some interesting blogs on the site. Looking forward to seeing you there.
Ofer, thanks again.
Thank you.
And for everybody following along on this version of eSpeaks, thank you and have a great rest of your eWeek. Thanks for joining us on eWeek eSpeaks. Go to eWEEK.com to hear more conversations with IT thought leaders.